So it's come to my attention that Surfbone has decided to poke his head up from the ground again and basically decide to talk about Dragon Ball. Now, we already know what it's like when Surfbone decides to speak on Dragon Ball and he decides to give his 2 cents. He usually doesn't have anything intelligent or nice to say. But I don't like the disingenuousness that comes from this video because he likes to portray Dragon Ball fans as these weird, I don't know, these weird manga type like cult leaders, you know, like these cult fan base followers, right, who just want to see Goku win no matter what, so they'll lie and make anything up, right? Now, I'm not lying. There are people who will do things like that. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that there are people like that who don't exist. But to say that there are people like that who exist and they're exclusively Dragon Ball fans, it's fucking insane. When there are way more fandoms out there who do way worse shit. Like, bro, first of all, there are fans like Sonic fans, like people who like the Mighty Gebra. Okay, the Mighty Gebra paid $100 to talk to Ian Flynn, right, and basically get nothing that confirmed his scale. He just asked Ian Flynn questions about something that he likely had nothing, like he likely had no idea about. But with that out of the way, let's talk about Surfbone's first point in his video.
This video is meant to educate those on the arguments these people make and the many reasons why I disagree with them, while backing up my disagreements by pointing out the many inconsistencies and issues that then arise from making these arguments genuinely. This is not meant to be a video series like back in the old days of YouTube powerscaling, where you call the head honcho who helped pioneer the argument and battle it out with them. As I said previously, these people don't care about representing the series with integrity. They don't actually care about discussing what is the more consistent interpretation to have. They just want more people to hear their arguments and convert them like it's some powerscaling cult. So attempting to engage with them, even with my arguments at your disposal, will only give them what they want. They don't care about whether or not they're wrong. They only care about what they can argue and get away with biting any and every bullet they have to. So hopefully with this video, I want to help prevent more people from thinking that they will be the person to prove them all wrong, because like I've already said, they don't care about being proven wrong, and you'll only be wasting your time. Now, some will probably ask if I'm giving them the attention that they want by doing this video. Sure, but this video isn't made for them. It's for those who truly don't know whether or not these arguments are valid enough to be talked about in conversation in regards to how powerful Goku is. And if I have to draw attention to these arguments so these people will have a better understanding with why I don't align with them, that's the pill I'm willing to swallow. So with that in mind, let's talk about the first argument people often make in regards to the Otherworld. The first scan coming from the Disenchu 4, an actual data book meant to help provide more information about the series that couldn't be expanded upon in the manga. Trust me, this distinction is important for the other sources we'll be covering later in this video. Where this is the common translation I've been seeing, but when I consulted my Japanese translator 02, it says this: a transcendental / supernatural world ruled by the gods, higher than the heavens, transcending dimensions that can't be perceived from the human world. The gods of heaven look down on the whole world from this place. Now with that said, the argument they often put forth is that this should make the Otherworld a 5th dimensional realm simply due to the phrase transcending dimensions. But the issue with that is that it completely disregards the rest of the text present, which talks about transcending and the fact that the Otherworld can't be perceived from the human world, aka the mortal universe, as well as it's a place where gods look down from. Which, if you take where the Otherworld is placed within the macrocosm, that's literally sitting on top of the mortal universe, this makes sense. So in context, transcending dimensions in the most literal interpretation doesn't apply, as there's nothing that supports this as opposed to what I'm suggesting. But detractors will say that nothing contradicts the definition that it's super literal. Well, nothing contradicts the fact that everyone watching this video eats poop. But obviously, we would never just assume that's true until, you know, it's actually supported and or proven by anything.
So Surfbone's first point, well, his first debunk attempt is against 5D Otherworld, which is obviously just comical at this point. We've already talked about comical debunks, and we've already talked about 5D Otherworld debunks, and we've already talked about why these debunks just don't measure up to anything. But with Surfbone, it just seems like he does not understand this concept very well. Now, obviously, everyone knows the Disenchu 4 statement by now, and his only gripe with it truly is the fact that there is nothing to support it. There's no evidence to support it being true, so there's only really one conclusion, and it's false. However, this is nothing more than a clear example of an argument from ignorance. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Obviously, someone like you, Surfbone, should know this. But there's also another problem with this argument that people don't tend to point out, so allow me to do so. Surfbone is indeed, in this instance, burden flipping. Now, there's a typical philosophy within the debating and power scaling world that statements equal feats without contradiction. Again, another basic level of understanding that Surfbone should have. Now, with that said, there's a statement within the Disenchu openly stating that the Otherworld transcends dimensions and is higher than the heavens. So the burden then falls on you to present why we would not be able to take this into account, seeing as there is a contradiction, right? Now, if you want to take the rat's way out and not show any kind of reasoning, then you can just go out the way of possibility. Now, the way of possibility is a little weird because you just kind of called everybody out for using an appeal to possibility later on in the video. However, this is kind of your only way out. You would need to literally appeal to possibility in order to kind of make a substantial argument here. And you honestly understand how fallacies work, right? So there is no logical way to take your argument into account from the way you see it.
Just like we wouldn't assume that Otherworld has a fifth spatial axis going by this vague definition until it's actually supported by anything. It would also at the same time be an appeal to possibility, where simply just because such an interpretation exists, that means it can be asserted, which again, we would assume it's true when it's proven, not just because there's nothing that directly contradicts it. Not only that, but the argument that, but it's not contradicted, kind of presupposes that there's other stuff supporting it, as if this isn't their only line of real evidence. With this being said, it's referenced as being higher than the heavens, even though the Otherworld contains heaven, and literally called a transcendental/supernatural world. Which, yes, it's a supernatural world, as in it's a place where the souls of the dead reside, with heaven being a place where heroes get to keep their bodies and continue to train while residing in the afterlife. However, it's with the word transcendental that these people are claiming that it supports the Otherworld being 5D, but are actually conflating it with the word transcendent, because the word transcendental is defined as relating to a spiritual or non-physical realm. So the idea of it transcending dimensions has nothing to do with the Otherworld having a supposed fifth spatial axis, but that you're going beyond the physical and proceeding into the afterlife, which is, what happens when characters go to the afterlife within the story.
Again, just showcasing that Surfbone does not read what he's talking about in this video. The only people that get to keep their bodies in Otherworld are special cases made by Kaios. Other than that, there is no keeping your body in Otherworld, bro. And this is the holy grail of the anti-5D Goku argument. I really can't stand when people talk about this because it's just like, it just shows that they didn't do any kind of research. You took one good look at the definition and decided to formulate your entire argument based off of that, but if you did one more minute of easy research, you'd be able to understand what transcendental and transcendent really mean in comparison to each other. In reference, take a look at the contentauthority.com. They openly highlight and compare transcendental and transcendent, and they basically explain the verses and what they truly mean. They also explain you should never conflate the two with each other or basically make them synonymous, but not for the reason Surfbone is claiming. The Content Authority states, one of the most common mistakes is using transcendental as a synonym for transcendent. While these words are related, they have distinct meanings. Transcendent refers to something that goes beyond the limits of ordinary experience or understanding, while transcendental refers to a philosophical or metaphysical concept that is independent of experience. For example, one might say that a beautiful sunset is a transcendent experience, meaning that it is awe-inspiring and it goes beyond the ordinary. However, one would not say that a sunset is a transcendental experience, as the concept of transcendental refers to something that is beyond the realm of experience altogether. So not only is transcendental metaphysics and concept, but on top of that, it is beyond the realm of experience altogether, meaning it's transcendent on a completely different level. Now, if you want to go do your own reading regarding the topic, you can go look at the article in the description down below. Just to prove my point even more though, I want to go look at other dictionary definitions just to kind of get a consistent basis of my truth. Now, in the context of Merriam-Webster, transcendental's primary definition, well, literally, its primary definition is transcendent in sense 1b, which states it's extending or lying beyond the limits of ordinary experience. Now, as you can see, both the dictionary.com's definitions basically encompass what I'm trying to say, and Cambridge does the exact same thing. So again, transcendental is transcendence on a complete level beyond experience altogether. Transcendental things are metaphysical in nature, that is obviously stated and shown, and also the same as Otherworld. So this next point is going to rattle a few brains here, so just listen to my debunk on this. There does not need to be any kind of demonstration here regarding their knowledge of power scaling. Now, in the data book scan, they're not talking about how powerful a character is, they're talking about the level of dimensionality an actual place is. So my question would then be, why does power scaling need to be taken into account for an instance like this to go through? Again, I hate when people love to talk shit about Dragon Ball fans and how nitpicky they are with shit, but they're just as nitpicky, if not worse.
Essentially, the surrounding context and how the Otherworld is treated within the series, it all points towards it being a spiritual realm where the souls of the dead and the other gods reside. I'd like to also mention that the whole lingo about transcending in regards to the dimensions is almost entirely power scaling lingo, not something really used when talking about vectors outside of our community. So in order for you to actually substantiate that the Otherworld must be a 5D realm, you would need more evidence to suggest this, especially from the series itself, in order to make this argument consistent. Now, you'll notice that this becomes a massive trend with these arguments going forward, which is inciting that the highest end interpretation must be the case in every piece of evidence they present. And because you can do that with the majority of these pieces of evidence, and isolate these statements in a vacuum, cutting them off from the actual series, that it makes it consistent. Basically disguising these very bad arguments by coding them in a numerical consistency, so that people will get fooled into thinking that these interpretations aren't being taken out of context if similar wording or conclusions can be drawn from multiple sources. This ultimate search for specific words is what we like to call keyword scaling, where you look for specific words or phrases and assume based off of the word itself being at all present that it means it scales very high. However, most who have any education whatsoever know that no one word has just one definition, in which requires us to analyze the context surrounding the word to better understand the meaning of the sentence itself. This often leads into a game of semantics, where people argue over the meaning of a specific word, phrase, or sentence, which unfortunately, because Dragon Ball fans infamously can't read, this type of conversation was inevitable. However, the various issues of doing these things like keyword scaling, isolating statements within a vacuum, then doing that with multiple scans to disguise them under the term of consistency, the issues become far more apparent after trying to line these up with the internal consistency of Dragon Ball, in which we then measure up these interpretations to the actual plot of the story to see if this ends up making the story of Dragon Ball more consistent if it were to be true, if you were to take them all at their highest end.
I'm sitting here reacting to this video and I'm honestly just wondering, like, why the fuck is he yapping? Like, it's just like yap. Like, I don't understand why he just keeps running his mouth about nonsensical bullshit. Like, yes, we understand the Dragon Ball fans tend to take shit out of context to make their character scale up a little bit higher. Every fandom does this. Dragon Ball fans are not the only people who do so. Now, if you're talking about out of context statements being made and used, you did the exact same thing. You took one definition, uno definition. You took one definition, that being the Oxford Languages definition for Transcendental, and you compared it up with that of Dragon Ball. You did the exact same thing you are criticizing Dragon Ball fans of doing in this instance. It took you 2 minutes to get across this point, and I shut it down in 30 seconds. Understand that, Surfbone. Come on now.
But that being said, this next scan that's arguing in favor of the Otherworld being a higher dimensional realm comes from, I kid you not, a Dragon Ball anime adventure rulebook for the Dragon Ball RPG game. Despite its obviously questionable canonicity, and considering the several amounts of contradicting statements within it, we're going to consider it for the sake of argument. As stated in the scan, it describes the Otherworld as another reality that isn't connected to ours on the most metaphysical level. Why is this impressive? Well, remember what I said earlier about them always assuming the highest end interpretation? Well, what happens is that they go on to conflate the term metaphysical and metaphysics. Again, they did this with Transcendental and Transcendent earlier, which apparently, because metaphysics is now somehow involved, and is often defined as a branch of philosophy that does talk about these things like space and time, that the realm must be Outerversal due to this fact alone. But when considering the context of Dragon Ball and what we just went over, this interpretation doesn't make sense whatsoever. And considering this isn't the only definition for both terms, which people often think that's how language works, we can actually make this statement consistent if we were to apply it for the sake of argument. As the prefix meta is the Greek prefix meaning either more comprehensive or transcendent. So metaphysical would obviously mean to transcend the physical in this context, as it is, the afterlife. This also applies to metaphysics, which often relates to the several ideas within philosophy dedicated to answering loads of questions that concern the nature of reality. In this case, the Otherworld not being connected on the most metaphysical level would be in reference to how, especially for Goku, he either had to die or get special permission in order to travel there in the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. And due to his prestigious reputation, he was able to train with his physical body while dead. And when he returns to life, no one is bothered if he just decides to train with King Kai. So it seems to be more consistent to interpret it this way, as this idea is actually supported by the source material rather than just assuming it's some Outerversal realm. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, and normally I would never entertain this argument, but because I want people to understand the huge flaws with these arguments, I have to talk about it. So here's the thing, metaphysics isn't really some codified term even in a general sense, with just about every philosopher having their own definition. If you ask an actual philosophy expert or a student studying it in college what metaphysics is, they'd likely ask you back whose version of it, or I honestly don't know. A more common interpretation of the word would be a study of systems beyond our natural world. So stuff like ghosts or demons would be called metaphysical, or stuff you would look into after you've explained the world. Essentially, the main issue when people are trying to argue with metaphysics becoming Outerversal is they're simply signifying a specific trait in how metaphysics often has to involve discussions about the universe and beyond. But that doesn't mean just the mention of metaphysics now means that they scale to every single little thing that could be associated with it. It's just like how people assume because we see an anime character read a Superman comic that all of a sudden that means all of DC is canon to that series, when that specific instance can easily be interpreted as just a simple cameo, and to suggest it being canon to DC Comics requires more evidence, just like how we need more evidence in things to suggest that simply the mention of metaphysics entails that the verse now scales above the concept of space and dimensionality. Now with that being said, let's talk about the guide itself.
Before Surfbone gets into the whole argumentation thing about, we're gonna get into that, but let's talk about this whole yapping session he's getting into, which is really mind-boggling again. Comparing the word metaphysics and metaphysical to transcendental and transcendent is just completely disanalogous. You cannot compare the two. I say this because of the fact of how the definition of metaphysical literally states relating to metaphysics, and metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principle of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. Now, I also wanted to point this out really quickly. If there's a word, transcendental, which also ties back to metaphysics once again, if there are two sources that are confirming metaphysical connections and ties, right? Would that not mean that there's a consistency chain of metaphysics being present within Otherworld? Am I the only person that's just not understanding this? Like, what? There are two sources confirming that Otherworld is a place of metaphysical connection. What Surfbone is arguing is highly unlikely because, again, there are more sources confirming what I'm saying and what other Dragon Ball fans are saying in comparison to what he's saying. So yes, even though there's a possibility of there being multiple definitions, you would still need to present a probability of the definition you're talking about being used in these instances. And like I said before, all signs are not pointing to that conclusion. So this is why I don't like anti-Dragon Ball people. Like, bro, your big thing is that Dragon Ball fans can't read, yet you're showcasing an instance of you not being able to read, bro. And here's my issue with this. Goku is not transcending the physical in this instance that you're talking about. In chapter 11, when Goku meets King Emma for the first time, it's borderline confirmed that he kept his body. So my question would then be, where are you talking about he transcended the physical? He's still a physical being in Otherworld. So what Surfbone is doing now is he's nitpicking the word to formulate his own definitions, which I really don't understand why he's doing this, yet he's looking at Dragon Ball fans as a certain kind of way. Like, you're showing the definition for metaphysics on the screen, yet you're just coming up with your own on the fly. And now what Surfbone is doing is a combination of appeal to popularity and appeal to authority. Because there are multiple people who have different interpretations for what this definition is, obviously there's going to be conflating reasonings and going to be conflating opinions. However, that does not make any one of them right. If I put 5 people in a room and 4 people say 2 plus 2 equals 7, but the one person says 2 plus 2 equals 4, who's right?
Now, for those who have been following my channel for a while, I have done many live streams on these infamous RPG rulebooks. Install Tinder, take a shower, get some ass, and maybe you'll stop, like goddamn. Where the scan regarding the Otherworld comes from, in which we went through each page and noticed many, and I mean many, contradicting statements. For what was supposedly a guide approved and reviewed by Akira Toriyama, despite the many times in the book the very game designers say that Toriyama has not confirmed any of the information they provided, which required them to speculate, which, coming from the guide, they didn't even know that this was the Daikai's planet, suggesting that King Kai's planet is a few miles wide, or that King Yama's desk is the size of the entire solar system. It's evident that these game designers don't know what they're talking about when it comes to the cosmology of Dragon Ball. This definitely didn't get any seal of approval to cite the correct information about the series. Which makes sense, since the pen, paper, action figure RPG book series, licensed by Funimation, written in the early 2000s by Mike Pondsmith, who's just simply a board game designer. And the only time Toei or Bird Studios were mentioned is when they said that they hold the rights and copyrights to the property of Dragon Ball. Not that this was even published by them. So it's clear based on what is provided from the rulebooks themselves that any piece of information provided from it is strictly for the Dragon Ball RPG specifically. And to act like or even claim that these were given as much thought into it or peer-reviewed by the Dragon Room or anyone at Toei, as if these RPG rulebooks were meant to be extensions of the series, like the Daizenshuu and Chouzenshu, is either being utterly dishonest or completely ignorant. Especially when they insert things like, if you had watched as much Star Trek as we did, you'd be able to figure out the pseudoscience of this stuff out. Which, I wonder what pseudoscience in the series told them that Goku turned the supposedly purple powerhouse birder into a purple dinosaur. But anyway, let's move on. So while we take a break from the RPG rulebooks, let's go over instances where people disregard the context of said scan and instead try to make it all about space and time when it isn't that deep. Which is when they present this instance where Goku's talking about how training and fighting within the Otherworld is far easier due to the concept of time not being present. So what does this prove? Well, to some, they believe this helps substantiate the Otherworld being an outerversal realm, or at least a higher dimensional one. But they're completely misunderstanding what Goku is saying here, as well as ignoring the many relevant points throughout Dragon Ball, where straight up saying the literal concept of time doesn't exist there at all introduces many contradictions and problems. First off, the best way to explain what Goku is talking about here when he says the concept of time doesn't exist in the Otherworld is similar to how you can say the concept of time doesn't exist for an immortal character. They literally have all the time in the world to accomplish almost anything they can ever aspire to have and or want. So for them, caring about the idea of time in most circumstances doesn't matter. So if you're literally dead, as Goku is in the story, what does the idea of time really mean to someone like him? Especially when he's currently existing in a world where he has no deadline to become stronger or worry about an upcoming threat. Especially since the point of the Cell Saga was Goku's desire to have Gohan take over, while he himself remains dead since he believes to have been responsible for inadvertently creating various villains that threaten the safety of Earth. So in that sense, he never has to worry about time affecting him in any significant way. Heck, even in this databook scan that they try to use and or support this argument actually supports my argument more, by explaining why it was easier for Goku to achieve Super Saiyan 3 while in the afterlife. Goku even elaborates on that in the anime and manga, that having a dead body doesn't eat up as much energy while utilizing Super Saiyan 3, if any at all, as opposed to using it while in a living body, he often struggles and the form ends up draining more than when even trying to power up.
This is going to be a common thing that I'm going to keep saying in this debunk video. It's the fact that you hate the fact that Dragon Ball fans take things out of context, yet you yourself are doing the same thing to make your video go through. The scan you are talking about is a cosmology representation referring back to the anime game itself. The guide speaks about cosmology in 2 different senses, one in actuality relating to the anime and the other relating to the game itself. That scan you're looking at is referring to the game and the game maps. Like, bro, come on now. This is why reading, folks, is very fundamental. Now, we know in the anime, the Otherworld tournament saga fully extrapolates on this newfound land, that being Otherworld and everything else in between. Now, the Otherworld scan you keep putting into question comes from the Saiyan and Frieza saga sections of the game, meaning this is before the Otherworld section where Grand Kai's world is fully talked about and even mentioned. So Surfbone would actually be pulling things out of context in two different ways. Anyway, let's start with the first statement that he tries to use as a contradiction, that being of King Kai basically calculating how long Goku took to travel Snake Way and how long it'll take for him to basically get to Earth. Surfbone's backing for this statement and his interpretation of it is pretty much just an entire half-truth. A half-truth is a statement that is made that is partially true, usually used to deceive and kind of manipulate a situation. Surfbone is deleting a fat context for these statements and many more statements to come. That context being that King Kai is openly trying to relate information to Goku, someone who doesn't understand the inner workings of Otherworld, whose knowledge and perception is pretty much confined to that of what he's lived in. So of course King Kai is going to change the way he speaks in terminology and relate information to Goku to make things easier for him to understand. What are you not getting about that, Surfbone? King Kai even makes a statement confirming what I'm saying, literally asking, but how much time do you have to Goku? Not we, you. Also, anytime King Kai is making a statement regarding time, it's usually, matter of fact, only about Earth, because the only time he's talking about time is with an Earthling. Do you see the connection there? Now, as for Goku being late, it also applies to the same argument that I made before, as this is an Earthling. This is not somebody who understands the inner workings of Otherworld. He does not get that. So again, to his knowledge and to his understanding, Surfbone, he may be late to saving his friends. That's all in Goku's head. That has nothing to do with, like, that's not a debunk to anything. It's not confirming anything for you. This is a huge example of a false equivalence fallacy, equating two things that have nothing in common whatsoever at all. Hit has an ability. The Otherworld is a construct. They are two completely different things. One is a place and the other is an ability that is key based. Also, I don't even think you understand how Hit's time skip works in the first place. Hit is not stopping time inside of his time skip, especially not when he goes into his pocket dimension. Hit only stops time when he entraps somebody in a time cage, which is basically that thing that he put Jiren in the Tournament of Power, anime version only though. Anyway, Hit is not stopping time, he is essentially skipping through it. So again, where do you find any comparison between this and Otherworld? This is another example of Surfbone being a hypocrite and not knowing how to read. Again, you will see a common trend in this video where you'll see Surfbone ramble and make a point a little bit, but then slowly diverge and descend into madness as it keeps going on for a longer time. So let's talk about this weird occurrence that Surfbone wants to talk about and then try to make an argument out of. Because I'm really tired of talking about this and then arguing about certain points that would just simply be debunked if Surfbone read. So every argument the Surfbone just made is not a defeater to what I am claiming, right? Well, we're all claiming that the super exciting guide openly highlights that there is a missing concept, that is time, right? Have you ever heard of the term called mutual exclusivity? These arguments, these interpretations can coexist and literally line up together. Goku literally does not have to worry about time, and that can mean everything we've all said. The Otherworld has no time, and there is no deadline for Goku to get stronger for. Like, there is nothing that Goku needs to be stronger for, but it's just a pastime. Goku has his physical body, yet he does not age, just like if he were a spirit. All in all, Surfbone isn't presenting a defeater, he's just giving another argument, and this argument can literally go hand in hand with what I'm saying.